big changing news overnight has been what we believe to be the Russian 4th Tank Army, instead of bypassing the city of Kharkiv, is now assaulting into it with light forces so far. So let's take a look at a little more detail at Kharkiv. It's a city of about 1.4 million people, roughly the same size as Newcastle. So a modern European-style city which is now being fought over. But what we've seen so far has been the application really of Russian light forces rather than the heavier forces, and that's an easier proposition for the Ukrainian defenders. But let's be clear, the main effort today, the center of gravity for politics and the military war, is Kyiv. So let's look at a map of Kyiv. So we know that during the course of yesterday, Russian forces have advanced certainly from the northwest, and we think clearly too from the northeast, and are now on the outskirts of Kyiv. What we haven't seen so far is more than the commitment of Russian light forces. And as has just been described, we know that in the middle of Kyiv, they are hunting down Russian irregular forces, special forces, that kind of thing. And that has caused a general alarm in the city and a curfew which continues throughout to today. However, we need to be clear that this is still just the opening rounds of the battle for Kyiv, because we need to understand the capability the Russians can bring to bear. Having said that, the Russian forces have not been as successful so far as was intended. And why is that? Well, a combination of inexperience, logistic shortfalls, the need to revise their plans as they've driven down the roads toward Kyiv, and of course, stiff opposition. And it's day 4, so everyone's forces will now be pretty tired. But let's look at some of the capability that we need to take into account. On this picture here, you can see the armoured forces that the Russians are looking to produce. Well, clearly not. Yes, there we are. So what we have in the top left-hand corner are very high capability Russian military aircraft capable of dropping bombs and firing precision missiles. In the top right corner here, heavy artillery with a range of about 24 kilometers, an indiscriminate weapon in a built-up civilian area. On the left here, the BMP-3, that's an armored vehicle that carries infantry in the back and has a gun and a missile launcher on the top. And on the right here, the T-72 tank with a range of its gun of about 2 miles. However, although these weapons are closing up to Kyiv now, we know that somewhere in the background, not yet seen deployed around these cities, are much heavier weapons. So let's start with this one. It's a thing called the 2S7. It's the heaviest artillery gun in the world. Its caliber is 203 millimeters. It fires a shell that weighs 110 kilograms to a distance of about 37 kilometers. So this could reach anywhere in Kyiv. And worse than that is this thing called the TOS-1. It's a rocket launcher. It fires 30 of these rockets at once with a range of about 6,000 meters. It delivers essentially a wall of flame capable of destroying a city block at a time. We saw this used, for example, in Chechnya. If this sort of weapon is deployed against Kyiv, we'll be looking at the use of conventional weapons that have the effect of weapons of mass destruction. So the key issue for the day is, as the Russian forces close up to Kyiv, are they going to apply this sort of overwhelming firepower to destroy the city that they think they're trying to liberate? So let's look at the overall military situation again. And what we've seen so far is successful Russian incursions, something like this. And we need to bear in mind that so far the Russians have used about half of the forces that they had assembled on the borders of Ukraine. And the key issue for the Ukrainian defenders is, in dealing with these incursions, they're beginning to be encircled, and they will have to decide during the course of the next few days or so whether they fall back towards Kyiv or whether they allow themselves to be encircled and fight it out. And when it comes to that, on this last map, this is the thing that underpins this entire campaign and the outcome of this war. So this shows the language distribution in Ukraine, and you can see towards the east of the country a predominance of Russian speakers. The further west you go, it's more and more Ukrainian speakers. So what President Putin is discovering is that he is trying to occupy by force the second largest country in Europe with a population of about 41 million people. At least 35 million of them resent, resist, and reject the Russian occupation. And with a force even of 200,000 soldiers, there is no way that you can occupy a country against their will of 35 million people and control it, unless you are prepared to deploy so much force that very quickly the word genocide will be on our lips.